A very big aloha. I'm Reverend Cindy Palos, and I wanted to talk about how we have to accept the world and things that happen, and how we can't judge God or blame God for what goes on in life. Now, I have seen some people really get so angry and so upset with things that happen to them and in the world that they have turned away and said, I don't believe in God. Now, here's an issue, lots of ways to look at this. Number one, I have many times I do a post and I mention the word God, and some people have issues with even the word God, and it triggers something in them that can trigger that anger. But there are other words that probably could express it without triggering that anger. I've sought this out. I've really thought about it. I've meditated on it. I mean, because supreme light, um, one source, one source of all, um, ultimate wisdom, ultimate truth. All of those might also trigger someone, maybe not as much as the word God. But it's hard to find one word that expresses what God is to me, and at the same time try to get that expression of how I connect with God versus how someone feels very hurt and has turned away from that word God. And sometimes that goes very, very deep. And the last thing you want to do, and especially me, is you do not wish to do any harm. I don't ever wish to do any harm. And so if I use the word God and someone feels hurt by it or it triggers something in them, then that's not what I wish to do. It's an interesting situation that I've been pondering a lot. And sometimes I've backed away because of this from using the word God. Now, if I could just explain my experience with God, it might help those who get upset by the word God, or it might help you to look at God in the way I understand God to be. I began it, as you might know, I began at a very young age, about the age of 13. And my mother was wondering what happened after death because my father died. And she began the studies of metaphysics. And metaphysics might have a very different view than religions in some source might have. But in metaphysics, you don't judge against other religions. You go to that one source and you do look at what the meaning of life is very deeply, very deeply. And that's where I began with looking at it in that way. And what I experienced in that way was being able to go within and connect with that one source, God in my terminology. And it was so far beyond what has been written down quite a few times by religion. In fact, very few religions talk, except in limited terminology or a few maybe poems, about that connection and how it is to feel connected to God in that direct sense. In other words, you experience what God is. Now, this is hard to describe. But for me, it was leaving my body behind. It was actually experience what you would do when you experience death, and then going beyond the body and going into the higher consciousness, and then going beyond the higher consciousness, going into that one light. And at that point, you are part of the one light of all. And when you go into that one light of all, then you go on that journey to that connection of the love of creation, that ultimate love. And when you experience that ultimate love, it is a cosmic experience where you are connected to the entire source of all creation. And when you experience the source of all creation, there is this enlightenment experience that actually changes your conscious way of viewing life and seeing things from a higher perspective. It's life changing. It is really, truly life changing. And at the same time, it's very hard to describe. Um, when I came back, I literally didn't want to talk for a day or two. And I saw things differently. I saw auras. I saw lights and colors in a different way. I saw life in a different way. And at that time, I wasn't very good at communication. So I decided to develop a way of communicating better. But in through all of that, it was very, very personal and something hard to describe. And so I usually did not talk about this. I interpreted what I experienced in poems and other things. Now times have changed since then. I've been around a long while now, and more people are meditating, and more people are starting to experience this. So there is more acceptance, I think, of this than before. But that doesn't mean that people who are still hearing the word God might not understand the deep, deep meaning that the word God has for them. And so I found myself backing off of using the word God a bit in my talks because sometimes people would get upset and make a comment about that, and I understand that, I see this happening even in yoga. Yoga is union with God. Yoga has meant union with God for a long, long, long time. But I now often see people not saying union with God as the meaning of yoga. They say union with your higher self or something else. So that has begun to be trying to be politically correct, but also it becomes watered down. Now, when you sit in meditation, a lot of times they don't even take the time in some yoga classes to do that connection or give you the space or time to connect with that union with your higher self. So when we start to back off and we start to limit what is the inner truth that we experience for other people because we don't want to offend them, unfortunately, that can it can be good in some ways because the people might still experience what you're experiencing without using the word God. But it also might just allow people to think that that's all that there is the limited place they're looking at. Now, I think that we are always learning, we are always growing, we are always expanding. And believe me, I've seen that in my lifetime as I've seen more and more people get into yoga, and more people getting into meditation, and more people still experiencing maybe something higher, but not expressing it because they're keeping it within because it's not accepted still by some people. So I just felt I had to kind of get this off my chest because I sometimes will try not to offend and I won't use the word God. When I'm trying to say God, it means so much more to me than it might mean to other people if they had experienced God. Now, I do try to give people the option, okay, God, or you might use the terminology, highest truth, the one light of all, the ultimate source. But I think at some point we have to accept that there is more. There is that connection to the ultimate source. And there is that quest. And even though I've experienced it on one level, I know there's more than that as well. And it continues, it's quite an amazing quest. And for me, this has brought a lifetime of connection and love and dedication and learning and growing and experiencing what it is I take with this and use in my life and how I use it and how I express it has been an amazing journey, an amazing process. And it's communication on a higher level that I've started to look at is how do you write a poem about God? How do you do a piece of music? I'm a member of the Grammys, and They give you categories to be in, and a lot of what I write has to do with my experience with God, but I can't put myself in the religious category because it may not fit according to limitations expressed by the people who control the Christian category. And I've seen this time and time again. So I mean, it's not just something I imagine. I know it's there, and I actually have to look at alternative forms of where I can submit my music. And what's the other alternative? Maybe there's a category called New Age, and I can submit my music in New Age. Now, in New Age category, there are many more people now submitting chanting and things such as that, which has now been accepted in New Age. And some of that can understand it and some of it can't, So it it's a constant process of learning how to communicate the highest and not offend, to live it and show it. And it always comes back to, no matter how high or how far you go, is to still what kind of person you are. Are you a really good person? Because if you get very, very far, and I have been blessed to know many of some very famous teachers, and some of them had very difficult lives, and some of them went through quite a few marriages and divorces and a lot of issues. And the question would be then, these are wonderful teachers that are very respected. Some of them sold millions of books. But were they really able to live what they got? And that's an interesting thing, because if you cannot live it, if you can't live with the basic concepts and precepts of kindness and lack of harm and doing the basic good things that a person can do, does all of that journey into self-exploration and the highest places you go make sense unless you can live it as a good person. So it kind of goes in an interesting full circle. In the beginning, you're initially just on this quest to find God, or whatever way you want to call God. And then once you do, then it comes right back down to that place of, well, okay, what are you going to do with this? How are you going to live with this? Are you able to take and digest and use this and be a person that is a valuable person, a good person, a person that is living those precepts in a wonderful way? So I it's a difficult subject to talk about, because the last thing I want to do is offend anyone. But I felt I needed to in some way. It came up, and I felt, well, I guess I need to really be honest, and I need to address this. And I hope I never offend anyone. But at the same time, I feel a real deep need to share what is my experience with God and the higher consciousness, and at the same time be able to be relatable to the persons who understand, well, is that important or not? Now, it all depends on how you use it, right? And so I leave it all up to you. And again, I really bow in gratitude. I have some wonderful, wonderful people who listen. And I am so very, very grateful, because I know those are people who already understand. And I know there's others that don't necessarily like anything that they consider religious. The categories I can choose um, really have to limit that sometimes, that I can put this in which category. So, again, I may hit people with the wrong way in that category, that don't believe or experience the same things I have. But I did feel a need to connect and explain and try to share a little bit of what I try to express, with great gratitude for those that understand, and with a really deep love for this process and for you being there. God bless you always.